The normal thing was I was supposed to have somebody who was supposed to handle the session for me today, but the person had a meeting with a very important meeting that they couldn't move. So I'm having to do it. So, but I'm not at my optimum health, but I'm good to go. So today I want us to sort of have a discussion on leadership and delegation strategy. So I'm going to unmute us at some point, or I'm going to give us the opportunity to unmute ourselves. However, I really appreciate this is being recorded, and every one of us will get the recorded version. I'm going to ask that if you are in a very noisy environment, please, you might want to stay muted and just communicate with us through the comment section. I'm not the only one speaking. Somebody is also going to come and speak for about 5 minutes. So please bear with us, but it's going to be worth your time. It's going to be completely worth your time. So today I want to talk about leadership and delegation. And the reason why this is important is because, in our role, no matter whatever role you start out with, in your job, no matter whatever role you start out with, please, I'd like to confirm if you can see my screen, let me know. Nobody knows how you feel. Right? If you can see my screen, please let me know. If you can see my screen and you can hear me, just let me know, just so that I know that I'm not talking to myself. Maybe post in the comment section. Okay, I can see now. Great, thank you. Anybody else? You can see my screen. You can hear me. Okay, can hear clearly. Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to be sure. Please, if there's any issue with the if there's any issue with the audio or video, you can just raise up your hand or send a message. I want to be sure that everybody can hear and can see. So, and why is this class important? It's important because, usually in our career, we usually start out being employed because of some technical ability, that we have. You go to school, you learn how to become a doctor, an engineer, an accountant, or what have you, and then you get employed. However, as you move up, if you ever move up, and most of us here move up, right? As you move up the corporate ladder and you become, much more useful to your organization, you move into what we call a supervisory role, right? At supervisory level, you're already beginning to have some leadership experience, but ultimately what you move into is like maybe a leadership or what we like to call management role, right? You move into a management role. At this level, this is the level where you need to upgrade your leadership, you need to upgrade your ability to delegate, because while in this space, success is your KPI is largely determined by, your technical ability, right? Here, your KPI most often than not is determined by your ability to achieve results through people, so that's one of the reasons why this is very important. And at the Institute of Management Specialists, exactly what the word says, management specialists. We expect that everybody at the Institute is at management level or on their way to management level. And we all will get to management level, whether we're running our business or we're working in another business, we would all have to be able to operate at that level. So, hence this class, we're going to be talking about leadership and delegation strategies. So just a little bit about me. My name is Ezekiel Sholisi. I lead this company called Live Simple. It's an acronym for Life Investing Money and Business Made Simple. And we've had the privilege of working with quite a number of clients over the years, inclusive of entrepreneurs. We've worked with over 2,400 entrepreneurs to date. And we have about 19 of our clients that do over $1 billion a year in revenue, right? So that's a little bit about me. So the first question I'd like to ask, and please, if you don't mind, I'd like to make this as interactive as possible, right? And again, whatever your answers are, there are not wrong answers. They cannot be wrong answers in this place. They can only be different opinions. So I'd like to ask, what do you understand by leadership? If you need to talk, you can unmute yourself so that you can say something. And if it's not allowing you to unmute, let me know so that I can do that for you. I'd like to get maybe sample two or three opinions, and then we take it up. So anybody wants to try something? Or at least you could use the comment section if you want to just type in.
Yes, I want to say something.
Okay, great, sir. Thank you so much, Engineer Vincent. Thank you, sir. So,
yeah, for me, leadership is the use of men and resources to achieve results.
Use of men and resources.
Resources to achieve results, desired results.
Great, amazing. I mean, of course, if you're leading, you're going to have to work with people. You're going to have to. Professor Al Amin wants to say something. I don't know. I've unmuted you, sir. If you want to, maybe you can unmute yourself, sir. And then Dr. Blessing also wants to say something. Thank you. Can you try and unmute yourself? I've unmuted you twice. Okay, yes, sir, you're good.
Okay, just wanted to give my own idea of leadership.
Yes, sir.
And to say it is the process of organizing resources and ideas to achieve a particular goal of an organization or a project. Thank you.
Beautiful. So, process of organizing resources and ideas. So it's much like what Engineer Vincent said, when you gave us a new dimension, you added the process angle to it. Thank you so much, sir. Anybody else? I'll take two more. Dr. Blessing, you want to say something? Dr. Blessing, do you want to say something? Okay, great. I can hear you. I think there's a problem with the internet over at your end there. Yeah, but it's dragging. It's dragging. Anybody else?
Of what?
Okay, yes, sir.
Hello?
I didn't get your name. This is 73382.
733, Mohamed Magaji. Mohamed Nazif Magaji.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Mohamed Nazif Ahmed Magaji.
Okay, yes, sir. So I can hear you now.
Hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you. You can go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know who called. I say, let me sit down. And good morning to all members.
Good morning, sir. I thought you wanted to. Oh, okay. You just wanted to say hello. Okay, great. Okay, so let's move on from there. So the questions that I want to ask every one of us, and we all here have some leadership position whatsoever. But the question I want to ask you, I want you to think about yourself as a leader and ask the people who follow you right now, the people who report to you, right? Question, would they follow you if they had a choice, right? If there was a choice as to picking their boss or picking their leader, would they still follow you, right? Two, would they still follow you if that choice attracts no sanction? So if they decided, for example, to disobey your orders, and it would attract no sanction, would they still obey you or not? Third, would they still follow you if they had more time or more information? If they were more qualified than you academically, would they still, want you to lead them, right? Because if they would leave because of any of these situations, then we need to upgrade our leadership capacity, right? So and all of the definitions we've given are really, 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 really correct. But the one I'm going to be exploring today, not to say that it's not any better than any of the definitions already given, it's just, my own angle to it, right? Leadership is the ability to inspire, and please, I'd like you to note the key word, inspire and influence a group of people to achieve worthwhile goals, right? And the key word first is to inspire, not to coerce, not to force, not to, not to push, but essentially to inspire. It was Jack Welch in his book, I have it here, Winning, somewhere there. And he talks about the fact that as a leader, you have to be able to inspire. You see, because when you inspire people, guess what? They would follow you if they had a choice, because they would choose you. They would follow you even if that choice attracts no sanction. They would follow you even if they happen to have more qualifications than you, right? Sometimes you realize that sometimes the people who lead and do a great job leading might not necessarily be the most qualified people. But one of the things that they always have is that they always have high inspiration value. So our job as leaders is to inspire and also to influence. Very, very important. Now, to look at it, right, I'd like us to really think about how the subject of leadership has evolved over time, right? So if we've gone through different phases of how a leader is defined, and I just want us to, sort of go through them together and see how it works. The first is, in the 1900s, we used to think about leadership as, the traits. The leader is the big guy. Oh, great. Yeah, we missed something, but we're going to do this maybe immediately after my session, before the next speaker, just so that we have as many people in the house. We would take introductions, if that's okay. Everybody would go around and introduce themselves, your name, what you do. I wanted to wait a little bit for that because at the beginning we only had about 15 people in the room, and I know that more people will come. So I will be done in my session in another 35 minutes, and then we'll take our time to do our introductions, if that's okay. Thank you very much, right? So the first is now, we have this, what we call the great man theory, where, the leader is the tallest amongst everybody else, has more significant physical quality. And so when you see somebody that has, sorry about my drawing, bulked up and biceps, very big chest, he's the strongest. So, we hand them, the baton of leadership, so, or in much more, recent, palette, when we look at people who are extroverts. So we used to think that leaders are people who are very outspoken, very energetic, very, they were taller, they were heavier, and that was the era when we essentially believed that leaders are born, it worked for a long time until we realized that some people who were introverts made better leaders, until we realized that sometimes leaders aren't taller, they're not heavier, until we realized that sometimes somebody could be born on the other side of town, but could essentially work his way to leadership, but this was valid for a long time because, back in the day, leaders were, essentially, kings, and all of that, right? So that's very, very important for us to note, so that's what sort of moved us essentially away from this philosophy, of leaders being extroverts and the likes. And then we moved into the behavioral part of leadership. And so, okay, leaders are leaders, essentially because they behave in certain way. And that's equally very true. And in fact, very, very true in today's world, right? So essentially what then happens is that the definition of who a leader is became a lot more broadened. And so we started to say that a leader is anyone whose actions and inactions affects somebody else, right? So a leader is simply anyone whose action or inactions affect somebody else. And, we might not realize this, but this definition has broadened the idea of who a leader is. See, because if you think about a leader being anyone whose actions or inactions affect somebody else, then it almost includes everyone. Because think about it, right? Think about a student, right? Think about a student, right? Student who is in school. The question is, can his actions or inactions affect somebody? Yes, it would. If the student decides not to be studious and essentially fail, right? That action of not being studious or inactions, of course, would affect first his parents, right? We might think that he's not leading, he's not a leader to his parents, but if it's affecting the parent to the point where the parent is becoming unproductive at work because the parent is worrying so much, then we realize, how much that anybody can be a leader. And this debunks the idea of leader of tomorrow, because every one of us is essentially leading today. Now, a simple illustration to think about is to think about the letter U. So if you think about it, there are about 26 alphabets. Is it 25 or 26? I don't know if I still remember my nursery, classes, right? But if you think about the 26 alphabets, right? So if you take out one, say the letter U, it looks like you just took out one alphabet and you have 25 left, right? But what you've taken out is about 3,000 plus words from the vocabulary, from the English dictionary. So think about where the word understand would be without you, right? If you think about where you would be without you, right? If you think about where underestimate, ultimate, all of these words, and it's sort of how being a leader works. So if you think about a human being, scientists tell us that one human being can essentially influence directly or indirectly by their actions or inactions 15,000 people in the world. It sounds, ludicrous. It sounds like it's crazy until you think about it in much more practical terms. So let's take two children, right? Let's take two boys. They're friends in primary school, right? Let's call this one John. And then let's call this one James, right? So they're both in secondary school. Let's say they're in GSS 1, right? And then this is in GSS 1, 2, right? So let's assume that these two guys are friends, right? They would essentially sit together in class, and all of that. And so for one particular time, James did not come to work, didn't come to school for about 2 weeks, right? Now, they're in secondary school, and this probably was far time away, and James didn't come to school for 2 weeks. John, of course, doesn't have a phone, and he's worried what happened to his friends. You can't reach him and the like. So James shows up to school 2 weeks later, and John asks, what happened? And James says his father died, right? Why did his father die? Well, his father was sick, was in the hospital. James said, I think they said the doctor made a mistake, some wrong medication, whatever. Long story short, the father died, right? So John goes home and he's thinking about his friend's father that died. Now, as he's sitting down, and you need to follow me here, as he's sitting down thinking about what happened to his friend's father, Mommy's working out of the house, and she's going to, make her hair. And so she turns back and then rules out a list of instructions to John. John, please, can you wash the dishes, do this, do that, do this, do that. Now, John is sitting down in the living room and is so deep in thought, sorry for his friend, and that he didn't even hear anything. So the mom walks out of the house and then comes back 3 hours later and nothing has been done. So the mom is angry. She's scolding John. So guess what? John isn't happy. John's mom isn't happy because she's now scolding John. but it was James' father that died, right? Now, as she's scolding John, right, John's father walks in and says, what happened? And she says, because I told him to wash the plates, I told him to do this. Now, but she said, this doesn't warrant all this scolding, it's just plates. Now she turns on him and says, you want to spoil my son for him? For me, in Nigeria, the bad child is the mother's child, isn't it? Wrongly so, I should say. So she also starts, so now there's an argument between the father and the mother of John, and they're in serious argument. And now, so two people are arguing, they're not happy. John is not happy, but it was James' father that died, right? And then John's father gets so angry, refuses to eat that night, goes to bed hungry, wakes up the next morning, dashes out to work. And just imagine that John's father leads a company of, let's say, 15,000 employees, and that particular day is like NPR, and market is not, business has not really been good. It's COVID-19. So he's angry from home. He comes to the office and pours that anger on every single person in the office. Guess what happens? Everybody, 15,000 people go back home and get all angry. I don't know if this has ever happened to us when we were younger. You did something that was a bit inconsequential, but your parents were more angry than you thought, right? Don't worry, it's not your fault. It's James' father that died somewhere. So if you look at all of these people whose lives have changed because somebody's father died, but if we look at the root cause, we realize that the father died because a child, while he was in medical school, refused to read and paid his way through school. Just that simple act of action or inaction, look at how much it has affected people's lives multiple years later, right? So that's how leadership, is that sometimes we don't even need to have leadership positions for our lives to really matter in the grand scheme of things, right? We can just essentially, our actions or our inactions affect people, and their actions or inactions affect other people, and their actions and inactions, and before you know it, the entire world is messed up, essentially because somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do, right? So very, very important. Now, what we now are going to look at is in the workplace, there are essentially different types of leaders that you would find in the workplace, right? We're looking at a situation where T stands for task, and then P stands for people, and S stands for self. So what you find is that in some workplaces, you find what we call somebody who is a task-centered leader, right? Now, a task-centered leader is somebody who has complete disregard for the people in the organization and just focuses on what the task is at hand. Now, a lot of the time, they usually get things done, but they leave a lot of devastation in their wake. People would essentially hate them. If you have a task-centered leader in an organization, what you stand to have is high staff turnover rates, right? People just roll in and out of that organization because even though the organization seems to be moving, the organization is not exactly moving because people are, the organization is having to reinvent the wheel oftentimes, right? And then you have the second type of leaders that are people-centered leaders. Now, people-centered leaders, they're usually great. People like them, but especially if they're middle management, they usually have a lot of problem with top management, because what we realize that middle management, is supposed to do two things. It's a balancing act. You're supposed to represent top management to lower management and also represent lower management to top management. So if you become a people-centered leader and want to please people, what happens is that you become an advocate, do a lot more advocacy than you do leading. And what will happen is, your people might like you, but you might lose your job really fast, right? Now, the worst of them is what the self-centered leader. The self-centered leader is not really loyal to anything, right? It's just, loyal to whatever his own agenda is. And I'm sure we've all seen those types of people in our workplaces, right? People who they have absolutely no regard for anybody else except for whatever it is that serves their personal agenda, you know, and if you don't align with whatever it is they want to achieve, you're wrong, right? So, but again, that's not the best way to lead. So what you now have also is, so the two types of leadership that usually thrives in the workplace is what you call the task people-centered leader. But the task people-centered leader, of course, is the person who's concerned about the task, you know, but is also concerned about the people, you know. So, but what leadership experts tell us is that the PTCL, people task-centered leader, where you're thinking about the people and their capacity to do the task, you know. So there's a lot of training for the people, you know. So when there's a task at hand, you're thinking about the people's capacity to make it happen, you know. So as leaders, we need to evolve, you know, to that. And, you know, and if you're going to evolve into that, then you need to engage a concept called situational leadership, right? Situational leadership is, as leaders, our ability to change our leadership style from time to time to suit, you know, whatever the occasion demands, right? So what does that mean? That means it's, of course, the model created by a legend of management called Ken Blanchard. Most of us might know him, and Paul Hesse, that allows you to analyze the needs of the situation you're dealing with and then adopt the most appropriate leadership style. And essentially, in simple terms, is the ability to adapt different leadership styles in different situations, depending on the personality involved. You know, so what matters is, who am I dealing with? And we already sort of engage situational leadership as parents, you know. So most of us here are parents, and you think about it, right? You can have the same situation, you know, done by the same offense committed by two of our children, and our response is usually different, you know, because sometimes we look at some of our children and we know that if we shout at this one, it will have far-reaching consequences into their adult life, right? But some other people, you know, so so situational leadership is essentially us just thinking about how to bring some of the type of leadership that works really well in our homes and bring it down to the office or bring it down to the workplace, right? So in situational leadership, we think about, we try to, you know, to disabuse people from similar treatment to equitable treatment. And equitable treatment is very different from similar treatment. You know, some of us might have seen a picture on Facebook. I don't have it here, but let me try and see if I can draw it. So in that picture, there's a fence, right? There's a fence, and then there are 3 boxes. So they gave a small child, so there are 3 boxes, and there are, you know, perhaps, you know, three people. There is a small child there, right? They gave him 1 box. They gave an adult the same 1 box, right? And then they left 1 box open, waiting for the next person. So this is essentially what you would call, so there was a teenager, you know, could actually, and then this is what you would call similar treatment. Similar treatment is saying treat everybody the same, you know, but you know, that's different from equitable treatment, because in equitable treatment, what would have happened is that this is what would have happened. You would have had the same fence, and then the small child would get 2 boxes so that he can you know, see beyond the fence. The adult doesn't need a box, right? And then the teenager would get 1 box, and he can also see it. So again, if you look at this, this is very different from the previous similar treatment, right? Similar treatment says give everybody 1 box each. Equitable treatment says, look, let's give people what they need and not just, you know, treat everybody the same way, right? So that's what this is. And if you're going to think about it that way, way and you think about, delegating, delegating to people that work with you, then you look at what we call the equitable treatment quadrant, right? And the equitable treatment has essentially, directing behavior and supporting behavior, right? So it has S1, which is the first one here. You have directing. I'll explain what it means. And then you have coaching, and then you have supporting, and then you have delegating. So usually what happens is that some of us get people into our business or into our teams, and immediately, because we think we have people in our organization, we start out quickly delegating to them. And of course, if you are in that room, if you're in that club, you already know how it goes, right? They make a complete mess of every single thing, and then you have huge difficulty trying to build a team because your people are there, they can't do anything, and the likes. However, what this model suggests is that when people come into the system, you engage some directing. Directing is you break all the activities into small chunks, and you give them tasks so that they can come back and report to you quickly, right? And then you move into the stage where you're coaching them. Now, who are you going to coach? And we'll talk about that in a bit. And then you coach somebody who the person is new, is already beginning to get it, and the person gets good skills, really good skills, right? The person is trying to build skills. So coaching is the process of imparting skills, right? But sometimes you find that some people are good, they are good. They don't have a problem with the skills, but occasionally they have terrible results occasionally. So sometimes it might just be that they're emotionally imbalanced. Maybe there is a wife, there's something happening at home, or she's pregnant, she has hormone spikes. So at that level, you need to engage supportive behavior. So for example, if a woman who's pregnant in perhaps her first trimester, or a woman who is in quote in her period, or a man who just lost his wife, or a man with his child in the hospital, if that person is not performing up to par, it's important for us to support them, reaffirm them, let them know that we understand that they are good, but they're just not in the right place right now, or maybe give them some time off. And then ultimately, you want to bring people to the point where they have the right skills, they're properly motivated, and so they can get the job done, right? So in doing that, it brings us, effective leaders are versatile in being able to move around the grid according to the situation. So of course, there are no right styles. The style that you engage would depend on the person who you are dealing with. And how does it depend? It depends on this. So we have this delegation framework, right? So we have, you have somebody in your team who's fairly new, right? They have low competence and low motivation, So think about a teacher who or somebody who studied engineering, and then, ends up, sorry, 1 minute. Ends up applying for a teaching job that they probably don't like, or somebody who studied chemistry who's not working in a bank, right? Now, so essentially what you would find is that the person at the beginning perhaps will have low motivation, low competence, right? So the person generally, lacking the specific skills required for the job in hand and lacks the confidence or motivation to tackle it. Now, what do you do for that kind of person? What do you do? Now, so what looking at this task level, what do? You direct, isn't it? You direct, right? That's what the person requires, right? And then you now have the person has, low competence, but high motivation. The person wants to do the job, but the person doesn't know how to do the job, so you coach, right? You coach this person, you help this person learn and become better at doing the job. Now, D3 is when you have somebody who's competent, really good at the job, or considerably good at the job. but, has low motivation, so you support that person. And like I mentioned earlier, this person might be somebody who's having a bad day, who's having a bad situation, who's having, whatever it is the situation is, right? So we need to support that person. And then ultimately you have the person who has high competence, high motivation. Of course, you delegate to that person. So most people, when they think about delegation, they think about, oh, I need to have people in my team and just hand them jobs to do. However, in handing people jobs to do, we need to think about how we are going about that process. If the person is fairly new, probably doesn't have a lot of experience, guess what? You need to direct that person, right? You need to hand the person, you need to delegate to that person on a task-by-task basis. The person should not be given the responsibility to be resourceful. The person should not be given complex problems to solve. The person should not be given, but when the person moves up, but of course, people shouldn't stay there for the rest of their lives. Eventually, they should move up to having to build specific skills, right? And as you build specific skills, you can, perhaps move them straight here if they're motivated. But, occasionally people drop down to this point, for different reasons. For example, if you take the COVID-19, for example, some organizations might have realized some form of, what do you call it now? Performance drop, especially with staff members that are women, because we still live in a society where a lot of men think that certain things are women's things to do. So if you think about two people in a house, they both work for a bank or an organization, and they both have to work from home, right? They have 2 children. The husband is easy for him to just lock himself in a room and do his work, but the children are also going to school online, right? So, essentially, you would see that the woman is the one trying to figure out how they're going to go to school online and at the same time trying to do her work. So if you have those types of people in your organization, understanding exactly what's happening, you might need to, take a little bit of workload from them and in helping them realize that you understand how difficult things are at the moment, That I was sharing with some people recently. I said, look, when the COVID-19 hit and a lot of us realized, sorry, 1 minute. So so when the COVID-19 hit, I was happy, a lot of us get to work from home, but at some point it became tough, right? Because now working from home means that there's no start time, there's no end time. So I find myself working up until 12 midnight or whatever it is, So, but just think about how hard it could be on some people. So sometimes in our delegation as a business or as leaders, especially those of us here that have people that answer to us, we must be supportive. We must be deliberately supportive to certain types of people in our organization. So what that means, for example, is if you have a lady that works in your organization, she has young children that might not be able to support themselves in their online learning, guess what? You might want to give the task that they have to do, you might want to make it much more later in the day or much more midday than anybody else. Because I know that most online schools are usually between 9 a.m. and like 12 noon. And for a parent that has children that are like 3, 4, 5, that's a full-time job. So the person might be operating at this level for a long time, but you realize that performance dropped to this level. However, don't be angry about it. Just understand that the person is at a time in their life where things are essentially working extraordinarily, right? So when people get into your team, you don't just delegate to everybody equally, right? You delegate based on competence level and motivation level per time, right? So that's why leaders have to really think through how they delegate. So as we close, I want to just talk about a few characteristics of leadership, and then we would end this session, right? Okay. So as leaders, there are a couple of things that we need to think about. I mean, a leader, must have character and competence. Most of us know that, there's this quote by a guy, I think it's Billy Graham or something. He says, when wealth is lost, nothing is lost. When health is lost, something is lost. When character is lost, everything is lost, right? So a leader must have character and competence, So if you think about this, most of us, character and competence is what helps the leader to be credible. So if you let me just take, in fact, I like to add character, competence, and conscience, right? So let's just think about just a typical situation, right? If you think about let's just assume that, let's say me, right? Right? I want to go to, let's say, Abuja, for example. So I know there's a number of people in Abuja in this place. Or let me use somebody else's name. So let me use someone else's name who is, so let's take Paul. Let's say Paul, right? Paul wants to go to Abuja, right? And let's assume that Paul wants to go to Abuja by road, right? Let's assume it's very unlikely that Paul will go to Abuja by road, but let's say Paul wants to go to Abuja by road, right? Right? So Paul gets to the park, right? Sorry. He gets to the park and he's going to take a bus. He gets into the bus, he's seated in the bus, and nobody knows where the driver is. Nobody knows where the driver is, but just right by the bus, there are a couple of let's say, people sitting down, drinking heavily, and just playing draft, right? But nobody knows where the driver is. So Paul is sitting down, and the bus is full. So now we're looking for the driver. Everybody's asking, "Where's the driver? Where's the driver?" And all of a sudden, the driver stands up from amongst those guys that are drinking, right? He stands up and looks disoriented. He staggers a little bit to the right, staggers a little bit to the left. He's clearly drunk. He falls down a couple of times before he gets into the bus. Eventually gets into the bus. He's looking for his keys, finds his keys, and then he's trying to look for the ignition point, right? Looking. And then Paul is like, "What the hell? This guy is drunk. What's happening here?" And people say, no, don't be bothered. He's been driving for 25 years. He looks like he's drunk, but he'll get you to Abuja. Now, there's a very high probability that Paul is not going to go with that bus. True or false? How many of us are going to go with that bus if the driver is clearly drunk? Drunk enough to not even find where the ignition is. How many of us are going to go with that bus? Nobody. So the guy has competence, but he's not showing character, so we're not going to go, right? So Paul walks out of that bus and then goes into another bus. He gets into the second bus. He's the first guy. He sits down in the front seat, and the guy is dressed properly. The guy is wearing a shirt, a white shirt, gray pants, sitting down, looking very good. In fact, the guy is so good. In the radio, he's playing one of these pastors. Let's say Adeboye, he's playing all this Holy Ghost seminar, that whole thing, right? And then, Paul gets into the bus and he's impressed. He's impressed that a driver could be, that, moral. So he's talking to the guy and he's like, "Man, you guys are you're very different. I've never seen somebody like you, and all of that." The guy is saying, "Oh, that's amazing." And then Paul just thinks about it and says, "I'm usually at this bus park, but I've never seen this guy." So he said, "Oh, guy, I've never seen you before. How have I always been missing you?" He said, No, actually, I just learned how to drive yesterday. This is my first time driving, but I believe that as we are here, as we are playing Adeboye, as the Holy Spirit is moving around, we will get to Abuja. All right? So how many of us are going to go with that bus? All right? The second guy clearly shows character, but actually has no competence. Right? So as a leader, character and competence are critical. You might be a good person, but if you can't do the job, you're not credible. You might be very competent, But if you're not a good person, there's a problem. You know? So as a leader, you have to have both angles, right? You have to have both angles. You have to have the character angle, and you also have to have the competence angle. Very, very, very critical, right? The second thing is that leaders have vision. Now, a lot of us might think about this place and just look at this place. It looks exactly like a desert. Now, it takes vision to look at this place and see a lot more than what it actually is. But somebody did, because this exact place that you're looking at, this exact bare land you're looking at is this place, right? It's Disneyland, right? So somebody, Walt Disney, looked at it. In fact, Walt Disney started building Disneyland, but he died before the completion of it. And at the inauguration, they were telling his wife that they wished he was here to see what it became. And the wife corrected them and said he actually did see what it became, you know, because all of this came from inside him. So leadership, vision is the superpower of a leader, you know. It's the ability to see your role or see, you know, whatever is handed to you, not just as what it is, but as what it could be. You know, see the people that work with you. You know, some of us might even know some of our bosses that we now consider great bosses because they saw us not just at what we had or who we are, but they saw what we could become. You know, and sometimes they pushed us because of it. But now we've become a lot more, and we look back and we're very, very grateful for those types of leaders, right? Of course, leaders must be able to communicate. They must be able to communicate their vision. It's absolutely no point if you learn. I'm currently reading, I just finished reading Snowball, Warren Buffett's biography. Warren Buffett is the #1 investor in the world, one of the richest men, I think the 4th richest man in the world right now. You know, but it was the richest man in the world. I think in 1970 something, it was $2 billion at the time. Now he's what about 90 something billion dollars. And you know, he said that the most important thing that he learned was he went to Dale Carnegie Institute and learned about public speaking and learned about how to communicate effectively, because he realized that it doesn't matter what we learn, who we are, what we know. If we can't communicate effectively, it would make absolutely little difference. You know, we'll not be able to move into our full potential, right? Leaders must be courageous, because sometimes what you're facing is a lot bigger than you. I mean, just think about the courage that leadership needs in these times, you know. These are very extraordinary times. COVID-19 is raging. We're not even out of the woods yet. I mean, not in any country in the world. Countries that thought they were out had to fall back in. Every country that is trying to stay out is every single day, you know, essentially working hard to keep at it. You know, so there's a lot of what do you call it? Courage that is required for these times, right? And then leaders must also be tactical in solving problems. You know, because sometimes leadership. You know, something happened to me back many years ago when I was in the university, you know, and it sort of, you know, reconstructed my idea of how hard it is to lead. You know, sometimes we look at leaders and we even criticize them, but we don't realize that there's a lot of strings that they have to deal with. So I'll tell you the story. So I graduated the best student in my class, right? Of course, I've been in management consulting for about 20 years, but you know, back then I studied chemistry. You know, so I graduated best student in my class. And so when I was in 300 level, when I was in 300 level, like the end of 300 level, I was called by my department, and I was told that I had to become the department president. I mean, there was absolutely no election. And the reason why they said that was that of all the people that was going to be in final year, I was the only person who had the CGPA that could handle both, you know, leadership and my academics. That if they put the burden on anybody else, the person would one of them would suffer, you know. And at that time, I had experience. I mean, I was already leading a group, in school where, I mean, even though I was studying chemistry, I used to teach business, you know, and the likes. I mean, I'd done so well that even the school, as a 300 level student, had asked me to take a GST entrepreneurship course as a student, you know. So, of course, I took it. I had no choice. So coming into 400 level, right, I was the only ESCO that had not been an ESCO before. And it was sort of against the constitution because you had to be an, especially if you wanted to be the president, you had to be an ESCO, so you understood how things work. So I never really understood how things work. So we get into 400 level, we had looked at all the things we needed to do. So we increased the departmental dues, so, you know, people were paying, you know. But I was called into a meeting at some point. It was an impromptu meeting, never entered that kind of meeting before. We went into the meeting, and I was told, everybody in the executive, you know, I was told that the staff advisor for the departmental, you know, for the department, the staff advisor is attached to us. I was told that the staff advisor needed to take a loan from the departmental account. I thought it was a bit unethical, you know, I mean, but again, my job was to put it to a vote. People voted, he got it. Now, essentially, he got about 70% of the amount that we had collected from the students at departmental levies. You know, and I mean, I didn't think much to it because I thought it was a loan. I mean, this guy clearly has a job. He could always return it back. It was a couple of hundreds of thousands. You know, so that was not a problem, you know. But it was towards the end of the semester, he didn't return it. So I was trying to figure out how to get him. So then, towards the end of the semester, the same staff advisor that took the loan, that wasn't going to return it, becomes my project supervisor. My final year project supervisor, all right? Now, I'm in double trouble, right? Because now I can't chase him too hard for the money, because if I do, my project will suffer. If I don't chase him, then the department would suffer because we won't have resources to carry out the project. If we don't have resources to carry out the project and students know about it, then I'll be called to the SDC. I might implicate him. If I implicate him, he'll lose his job. But if he has, you know, huge connections within the SDC, he might not lose his job, but I would then take the fall for it. I mean, it became so complex. It was difficult to handle. It was difficult to meet the man for our project reviews because he wouldn't want to see me. In fact, to be able to meet him about my project, I have to find where he is part-time, ambush him, and only ask him questions with regards to the project. So needless to say, I did absolutely nonsense in my project. My project deserved a D. I'm serious. It really deserved a D. You know, and I had to, at some point, I called all the final year students together, put them in a closed door meeting, explain the entire situation to them. So we had to do some fundraising among the stuff. We sorted everything out somehow. And I had to find lecturers that were like his friends, but they were not snitches, so they were not going to go and tell the HOD. And I had to start to talk to each of those people and say, please, can you help me talk to this guy? This is the situation. So they were sort of talking to him. But eventually we got everything sorted out. He paid the money back. In fact, after my final year, I had to wait 3 weeks after in school to make sure that he paid the money. So he paid, we did everything we needed to do. We are taking some loan as a department. We're able to return some money. We're able to, of course, because we also raised some money within the final year, we're able to get those things. But that experience taught me something very powerful. That a lot of the time we look at the leader and think that everything falls on him and he should take the fall. And yes, he should, but sometimes the strings pulling this guy is completely unthinkable, right? So back to my project. I told you that my project deserved a D, right? So because I sort of covered I sort of shielded the lecturer throughout all this process, he gave me an A. And he gave me an A in the project. And professor is looking at me. So he gave me an A. But of course, if your lecturer gives you an A, you still have to go to the external lecturer and defend whatever it is that you've done. So I'm sitting there in front of this external lecturer and I'm just talking nonsense, right? Because even me, I don't understand jack of whatever it is that I did. And this is not like some accounting or some This is like a chemistry project, right? If you don't know it, you don't know it. It's nonsense. So I'm there, and I'm just, talking, blabbing, and the guy's looking at me like, what the hell, And so the excellent lecturer, out of pity for me, knowing that I was like the departmental president, just degraded me down to a C. And so, he went to but I saw this man went to the HOD's office and said, "Sir, no, I handle this project personally. This man, he has done so much for the department, blah, blah." Long story short, I got my A back that I obviously did not deserve. But the thing is, it was a very tough time for me in being able to navigate the tactfulness that is required to manage somebody like that or manage a situation like that. So sometimes leaders need a lot of tact in solving problems, because sometimes the problems are not that. Take a look at Nigeria, for example, right? Nigeria's problem is it's multi-layered, it's very complex, right? We say we don't have light because of the people that bring in that import generators. Well, we don't know whether that's true, but the people that import generator pay import duty, and we know that customs is the second largest revenue generator in the country. All of that stuff. So if you look at all of the intricacies and all of the, when people invest in you politically and how they come to ask for what they've invested in, it's usually very, very tough. So leaders require a lot of tact. Leaders connect with people. I need to run now. And leaders also invest in people. So sometimes there's a concept called the emotional bank account. So you need to invest into people before you get, things out. So I think it was Abraham Lincoln that says, people don't care, what you know until they know what you care. Leaders are winners. Leaders love to win. And leaders have a positive mental attitude. In our minds, there's something called the reticular activation system that really controls. If you've ever really wanted something and you only see that thing around, is because your mind is fixed on it. And what that teaches us is this: you would always see what you want to see. If you, there was a study done to sort of understand the concept of luck. It was done in the US. So they took about 100 people, right? 50 of them considered themselves lucky, and the other 50 considered themselves unlucky, right? Now, so of course, the only way you can really test the concept of luck is by doing something that has that nobody can control, which is to roll the dice. So they had these different groups roll dice, right? They rolled, and so they found out that on the average, every single person on the average scored a 6 out of. They scored the die turned into a 6 in about 20 times. So they let them go home, and then next day they interviewed these different groups. And they found out that the guys who considered themselves lucky, when they interviewed them, on the average, their review was like, can you imagine, right? I scored 6 once every 20 times. That's amazing. It means that if I want to score 6, if I want the die to turn 6, 5 times, I just have to roll it 100 times. That's how lucky I get. But the guys who consider themselves unlucky said, I told you I was unlucky. So I scored 6 only once in 20 times. Can you imagine how many times I have to roll the dice just so that I can get 6? So they realized that lucky or being lucky essentially is in the mind. It's what the mind is looking for that it finds. Leaders are learners. They are always learning. I know that we all have huge capacity for leadership because we're in this class, and leaders are teachers too. They don't just learn, they teach what they know. Leaders have commitments, right? They have commitments. So if you look at the bacon and the egg, right? If you look at the bacon and the egg, right? The bacon and the egg is made up of 2 sets of people or 2 sets of animals, the chicken and the pig. So the question would be, who is more committed to this dish, right? Which of them is more committed to this dish. If you look at it, the chicken only had to lay an egg, the pig had to die for this dish to happen. So leaders are like this, right? They are very, very committed. You know, they didn't just lay an egg and leave, you know. In fact, they find a way, if possible, to lay down their lives, you know. And Martin Luther King Jr. said that the person who has not found something that they are willing to give their life up for has no reason to live. Leaders focus on what is important. You know, I think it was Brendan Burchard that says the main thing is making the main thing the main thing. You know, that's it. And then leaders empower others. Very, very important. Very, very important. If you're going to be a leader, if you're going to succeed in leadership, because we all are leaders, you know, we have to be willing to empower others. Thank you very much. I think that's good. I hope it was a good session. I'll unmute everybody now so we can take I'll take questions for like just 2 or 3 minutes, and then everybody will then get to introduce themselves, and I will hand the mic back to Mr. Theophilus, and he will introduce our next speaker. Yeah. So any questions? Any questions? Oh, Wendy. Okay, sorry. Let me try. I've unmuted you, but I'll try and do that again. I just did. Please, can you unmute yourself? Okay, great. So, yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello.
We can hear you. We can hear you, man.
Yeah.
We can hear you. Are you saying something and we can't hear you? We're getting a lot of background noise from Oluwa Damilola's. Mrs. Wendy?
Yes, please. I wanted to say, I didn't hear your last sentence. Your last conclusion, I didn't hear it. I didn't get it well. You were saying leaders are these leaders.
So I think the last thing I talked about was really the fact that leaders empower others, right? You know, in life, we don't lose our energy, we don't lose our authority by giving it away. We actually become much more important when we give it away. You know, so as leaders, our job is to empower people to do our job so that we can be moved to a higher position. Because usually when people that work with you in your team, you know, when you empower them well enough, what happens is that, you know, you'll be moved to a higher position because you've been able to do such a good job. Thank you. Any question or suggestions?
Thank you very much.
Any question or suggestion or addition?
Yes, I got
Prof, thank you very much, sir. I hope my certificate doesn't have less value because of what happened to me in my career.
Hello, can I? Please, I want to. My name is. Are you hearing
Sorry,
me, please?
I can hear you, sir. I can hear you. I don't know your name is Infinix S4, but you can say it.
I work as Deputy Director and Federal Minister of Work. Deputy Director.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. When you were talking in your first introductory speech, you sort of say that a leader is the person who does an action that affects one person in one way or the other.
Yes, yes, sir.
To an extent that a leader, a student, for example, a student that does something that affects her parents, that parent might not be in a very, very good condition, situation that will enable her or him to have a comfortable environment to do whatever.
Yes, yes, sir.
Now, having said that, my fear is that I'm looking at leader, somebody who is a leader, from this perspective that a leader has a followership. A leader must have a follower.
Yes.
Now say students.
So there are two things that so the first is there is the concept of who a leader is, and then there is leadership. So anybody, every single person have the capacity to be a leader. That's why I gave the instance of the child, of the fact that the child's actions or inactions can affect even their parents and can even have far-reaching consequences. However, leadership itself is predicated on the fact that you have people that follow you, of course, in your work, in your religious organizations, or whatever. And leadership is a deliberate act of actually working to, and that's why we defined it in the beginning and said leadership is the ability to inspire and influence, but that's different from who a leader is, right? A leader might not do leadership well. A leader might not lead well, but it doesn't change the fact that a leader is a leader. So it's like what's happening around the world, right? So a man is a man. But we know that, we now live in a world where a man can refuse to be a man and be something else and say that he is, whatever it is. Now, I mean, BBC tells us now that there are 200 different genders in the world. Doesn't change the structure of who he is, right? So a man is a man, but can he be a good father? That has to be learned. Can he even be a good man? That has to be learned, right? So the idea of who a leader is versus what leadership is leadership is actually the act of, working with people, but a leader is anybody whose actions or inactions. And I think that, that definition works because it allows us to take personal responsibility. And if I'm aware that whatever it is that I do or don't do has far-reaching consequences beyond just myself, it will enable me to take things a lot more seriously than I normally do, right? I hope that answered. Sorry, sir, we're really, really out of time. Somebody else is supposed to speak. We're supposed to introduce ourselves. So I really would like to hand over to Theophilus now. Theophilus, can you take it over from here? I'm going to be making you host now, so you can mute unmute anybody. So I'll stop this.